Hello everybody and welcome back to another War Thunder video. Just so you know, this is probably going to be my last video for a few days because I am going away tomorrow to visit family and should be back on Wednesday, so you can expect standard content releases to start around about then. Although the rest of my family is on holiday, so chances are I may not be able to upload as much as usual, but be assured I'll be back then and things will soon be running as smooth as they normally are. So, this is another tank review video for T-64A. Oh my sweet Jesus, could I be happier? That's a rhetorical question and the answer is no. I really wanted this tank as soon as it came out, and Scooter has had it a lot longer than I have because he's a jammy bastard. And you can guess how he got it. I mean, he did grind a lot of it, but like me, he got kind of bored with grinding and just decided to buy it outright, which is perfectly fine. I don't judge anybody from doing that. Let's face it, with the amount of experience and credits these things cost, that's a perfectly reasonable option. So, I got this thing after the change recently for the BRs and the points that it costs to repair this thing. It was around 20,000 lions. It's now only, for an unupgraded tank, it's 4,390. This is pretty good. So, while we're here, let's go over the stat card and get cracking, shall we? This has a 125mm 2A 46-1 cannon. This is an auto-loading gun, not magazine-fed auto-loader, it's a proper auto-loading system. As a secondary, you have a 7.62 PKT machine gun. Turret rotation speed is 13.4 degrees per second, which is pretty good for this sort of tank. A vertical guidance, -6 degrees of gun depression, 14 degrees of gun elevation. A reload rate of 7.1 seconds, which is fantastic. This will not improve with crew level because it's an auto-loader. The hull armor. Right, I'll go over the armor on the stat sheet and then we'll look at the armor properly because this is composite armor. A new thing to War Thunder. 80 on the front, 85 on the sides, 45 on the rear. Turret armor, 180 at the front, 150 at the side, and 65 at the rear. Armor penetration we'll go over in a minute. Exactly 38-ton vehicle with a 619 horsepower engine. Maximum speed of 61 kilometers an hour. On tarmac, I can see this being feasible once the thing is upgraded, although I've never got it to go that fast yet. Maximum inclination of 41 degrees. Repair cost we've already gone over. Maximum vehicle efficiency is from tier 5 to tier 6. 400% research points, which is 2 times 100 and 100. So 2 times 200 basically, 400%. And reward is 150%. I did put a talisman on this thing before I even drove it. Normally I'd only put a talisman on a vehicle if the vehicle is any good, but because this is the new Russian top tier vehicle, and I really wanted to put a talisman on it anyway because it just makes it more viable to use. So, let's have a look at the armor, shall we? Because this is where it gets complicated. I should point out my working knowledge of composite armor is quite slim, although from what I know it's basically sandwiched materials. So you have a layer of steel which is 80 millimeters thick at the front, that's just the steel though, and then below that you have, it's like a rubber sort of compound that's spaced out with air in between, and then you have the steel at the bottom, which makes sort of like a sandwich of armor. Designed to defeat ATGMs and heat shells. So 80mm thick, as it says. However, we'll get to the composite area of the armor in a minute. 80mm thick on the top and the bottom. The turret is much better armored. 380mm directly at the front. 180 there. Obviously the angle gets more, so it's an auto bounce zone if you hit the turret on the sides. Side of the tank. Here it's 85mm. This is also separated. 70mm at the rear side, the rear part of the hull. 20mm there. Of course you have the tracks acting as spaced armor. Side of the turret, 150. It's in segments. Look, 180, 180, 330. Side of the cupola being 100, and 65 at the rear. Rear of the hull, about there, 45mm, 20 on the bottom, 20 on the engine deck. The wood actually acts as armour, according to this, which is good, because you'll need it. Rear of the turret is 65mm thick. So, let's look at the composite side of the armour, shall we? There we go. So as you can see, composite armour, it's layered and angled. Alright, so that's the steel, and then this is the composite beneath it. So against kinetic energy munitions, this is APDS shells, APFSDS shells, armor piercing high explosive shells, basically anything that isn't heat of any description. 320mm of thickness against that, 450mm of thickness against chemical shells. So this is made up of rolled homogeneous armor, which is the outer layer, textilite, whatever that is. Like I said, I think it's a combination of rubber, steel, fabric, you know, it's all layered together. And rolled homogeneous armor at the back, which is another 20mm of steel armor. So it's a sandwich, right? And you see the carousel at the bottom for loading the shells. But we'll get onto that in the gameplay. 400mm on the turret, 450 as far as chemical shells are concerned. There is a gap in the armor, you see. This is why either side of the gun is 330mm thick rolled steel armor. Although it's thicker, it's still a weak spot. People can punch straight through the side of your gun mantlet and take out your crew. And as this thing only has 3 crew, yeah. So this is made up of cast homogeneous armor, 180 to 130mm thick, high hardness rolled armor, whatever that means, and rolled homogeneous armor on the inside. Pretty straightforward. So you get 3 crew, 2 in the turret, and the driver is sat in the hull, unlike the KPZ, which has all of the crew in the turret. It's a very tightly packed tank. Of course, in real life, this thing would have never really been penetrated. We'll get on to the T-64 as a whole in the gameplay, because it's quite a fascinating vehicle to talk about, especially when you consider its history. Engine and transmission is in the rear. This is very, very usual for most Russian tanks. The driver is sat right next to 2 fuel tanks, but all of it is protected by that armor, with more fuel tanks in the rear. Here and here. Yeah, that's about it for the armor layout. So let's get on to the modifications, and then we'll move on to the gameplay. The shells. The first shell you'll get is the 3B-M9. This is APFSDS, armor piercing, fin stabilized discarding sabot. Weighs 3.9 kilos and has a ridiculously high muzzle velocity of 1800 meters per second. At 100 meters, it will penetrate 307mm of armor on a flat angle, and 263mm of penetration at 2000 meters. The next shell you get is basically the same, but with much better penetration, same muzzle velocity, same weight. 378mm of penetration at 100, 327 at 2000. You also get a heat shell, which at this battle rating, and given the new meta, is next to useless. As far as I'm concerned, I would much rather use the sabot. It's much more reliable. Of course, with sabot you have more of an issue with it bouncing at extreme angles. Not that I've actually encountered that issue yet, but I'm sure I will. And of course you get HE, which is most definitely useless. And the rest, everything else you have to unlock, as you can imagine. Okay, so that's the end of the garage part of this review. I'll see you in the gameplay. Cheers. Okay, so now we're on to the gameplay section. This is a very short segment of video, but it was the best game I've had in this thing so far. Most of the games I've got into, I died from getting shot in the side or the rear, which didn't really prove the effectiveness of the armor. This game more or less does. So the T-64, a little bit of quick history. This tank was so top secret in the Soviet Union that it was never exported to the majority of the satellite nations that the Soviet Union was under control of, such as Czechoslovakia, the Ukraine. There are more. I'm not a massive I'm not a geology person, so geography, sorry. You get the idea. The only other nation that received any of these tanks was East Germany, and that's only because East Germany was right on the front line of the Cold War. They were right on NATO's doorstep. So if the Cold War ever went hot, the East Germans would be the first force to encounter NATO. So they needed something to fight against what then was NATO's modern battle tanks. In this regard, the armour and effectiveness of said armour was top secret for a very long time. Obviously the tank is quite outdated now, although later models of the tank, such as the T-64BV, which actually is in the game, somebody designed a working model of it and a mission, which I think Slick uploaded a video of. And I imagine that will be one of the next tier 6 tanks. Ooh, KPZ. Yeah, one shot, no issue. Sayonara. You can hear the auto-loading system working there, I hope. The auto-loading system is a carousel, as you will have seen in the armour segment of the garage part of this review, and loads the shell first and then the bag charge. Very much the same as the Chieftain, although the Chieftain doesn't have an auto-loader, it's actually a manned, the gunner and the loader actually have to use the gun like that, which means the loader would have had to put in the shell, then put in the bag charge. Whereas in this, a mechanical arm takes a shell off the rack, stuffs the shell in the breech, takes a bag off the rack, stuffs that in the breech behind it, shuts the breech, and then the gun's ready to fire. This is why the reload rate is so fast. Most of the gameplay I had in this tank involved me getting shot in the side or the rear, as I already mentioned. So in this game I'm playing a lot more more passive-aggressive. I push when I think I can, but I'm not being overzealous with the throttle. This is something I've learned to do in the Chieftain, because the Chieftain's hull armour is absolutely dreadful, even the Mark 10s, which only has the steel blue armour on the turret. So it's effectively the same tank, just with more turret armour. This plays very much the same as far as I'm concerned. You sit in a spot that you're comfortable with, use the gun to its advantage, because very high velocity, very good penetration even on the standard shell, and drive it according to that method. There's a Leopard A1A1 behind this rock, not really an issue for me, especially once the shell connects. The side skirts on the side of the tank are designed to stop heat and ATGMs from penetrating the side of the hull at an angle. These do work. I haven't experienced it happen to me personally, but I've seen Scooter playing this tank whenever before the matchmaking change, I was getting into games with him in my T-62 and my T-55A, and I saw him taking hits, and that was an unfortunate miss. I saw him taking hits and realised that the shell does, the side skirt armour does work quite effectively. Of course, it's very situational. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. This is War Thunder in general, really. As with what I've experienced to be normal for most of the matchmaking in War Thunder, the armour, once again, is situational in general, whether it's composite or not. You'll find that sometimes you hit something will hit you and it might hit at a slight angle and just bounce, other times it'll penetrate through the front of the armour. Due to the meta change, people are using kinetic ammo far more than they are ever using chemical ammo at what used to be tier 5, well, still is tier 5, but now it's from 7.7 to 8.7. Because those tanks at that battle rating still have only steeled homogeneous rolled armour, rather than having composite armour like the KPZ and this thing. Due to that fact, it's no longer viable to be firing heat at these tanks. So at this battle rating, everybody's firing kinetic ammo, which near enough nullifies your ammo, nullifies your armour, sorry, so long as they know where to shoot, which generally is just centre of mass with the penetration on offer here. That is my third and final kill on a KPZ. Due to their mobility in comparison to the T-64, they will get to the cap points before you do. This is why I stress that you should play the tank more tactically. The KPZ is just an overweight, bigger, more powerful Leopard. This thing is, although it does share some similarities between the T-62, it's nothing like it as far as the way it plays. The T-62 is much faster, at very least in reversing. This thing's reverse rate is one of its letdowns, as well as the lack of a cupola or turret mounted heavy machine gun, which the KPZ does get, although that thing gets a 20mm. so it can shoot down aircraft with much more impunity, whereas this thing's 7.62 or 7.92, I've forgotten now. KPT machine gun is only really for taking out AA vehicles. But at this battle rating, none of them are open topped, so you're going to have to work pretty hard for that to work. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick look at this tank. I will be driving it much more. I thoroughly enjoy playing it, even if I am crap. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like, share and subscribe if you want to see more. I will see you all when I get back. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.